Open borders. Open borders rectifies a glaring and morally problematic inequality of opportunity based on location. That's what Bleeding Heart Libertarianists believe, because they think that being born into the first world is akin to being born into nobility in medieval times. The argument comes from the unfairness that richer people in more developed countries have more opportunities to increase their wealth, where poorer people in countries where there may be human rights abuses or violence is very prevalent do not have such opportunities to increase their wealth, and they are the ones who need to increase their wealth most in a capitalist economy, global economy. What they believe that allowing people to move would help this problem. How so? Let's talk to Sam about that. How could you actually carry out this policy? How would it, in reality, be legislated by government?
Well, when you ask most people who are opposed to immigration why they are opposed to immigration, they overwhelmingly give economic reasons. So the biggest one is that they're afraid that their job might be stolen and their wages might be hit. After that, there are things like people worrying about immigrants sponging off the welfare state, getting access to housing and things like that. And the economic and empirical evidence is pretty clear that that doesn't happen. In terms of wages, immigrants certainly, on average, drive up wages. There is some evidence in the UK that over the, I was looking at the numbers yesterday, between 1997 and 2005, the total amount of immigration then reduced the wages of the bottom 10% by about £20 a year, which is obviously not very much, but that's kind of different. On average, it's something like £40 a year increase for the average person. But even then, there is new evidence from Denmark and there's existing evidence from the United States that even though in a kind of static analysis like that, there is this hit to the poorest, when we look at the dynamic effects, they're still positive, even for the poorest people. Because in the same way that when we trade with people in poor countries, we kind of move jobs from sort of low-skilled jobs from here to there, sort of manufacturing-type jobs and so on. And that allows us, it creates extra demand and so on for more highly skilled jobs here. Not necessarily very highly skilled, but kind of slightly more highly skilled jobs here. The same thing seems to happen when immigrants come to our countries. So it's true that fewer jobs in Pret will be taken by British people, but more jobs will be created in kind of slightly more technical or slightly more complex industries. And that means higher wages, and those jobs are more likely to be filled by native Britons. So even for the bottom 10%, even for the bottom group of society, in the long term, immigration seems to improve their welfare. And I think if people realised that immigration doesn't make them poorer and it doesn't threaten their jobs, they would be much less hostile to it.
So do you think this is what fuels the discord between mainstream public opinion, which is negative towards migrants and also negative because of the housing crisis in the UK, as opposed to politicians who, as all the main parties, actually do support immigration, even David Cameron, even though he's reluctant to say it?
I think it's very hard for politicians to push public opinion in one way or another. I think they generally follow what the public is doing, and it's certainly not helpful the way the media approaches immigration. And really one of the problems is that the public doesn't know very much about the basic facts of politics. It's not something that they should feel bad about. But when you ask people what percentage of the country do they think are immigrants, the average guess they give you is around 31%. The reality is 13%. We're talking about a huge disconnection between what people think the country looks like and what the country actually looks like. And that means, yes, of course, if you think that 31% of the country are immigrants, that's going to make you a little bit worried. Yes, of course, if you think that immigrants steal your jobs, then that's going to make you resistant to immigration. I think it's a slow process to change people's minds and to give them the facts, but we have to do something. We have to hope that we can get through, because I think that most people who are at the moment concerned about immigration, if they actually knew that immigration wasn't harmful to them in the way that they fear, then they would change their mind and we would have a much, much more hospitable atmosphere for immigration. But certainly this disconnection between politicians and the public is a problem. And I think it's because politicians, I'm not praising them too much here, but they know more about this sort of thing than the public does. They spend more time reading these things and kind of learning about these things. And that, I think, explains why you have this disconnection between the public and the politicians. But there is no quick fix for this. I think that the sort of work that we do and that other British Future is another example, which tries to educate the public about the impact of immigration and the positive aspects of immigration, is really the only thing that we can do to try and change things.
But say, what about the impact on the welfare state that's often mentioned? Wouldn't lots of immigrants that would be likely coming in because of the migrant crisis we see, wouldn't that have a really negative effect, and also say on the welfare state?
Well, there's this great myth that of the immigrant scrounger, and a lot of people are really worried that immigrants come in, just take our housing, take our NHS care, and take our benefits and don't give anything back. But empirically, that's just not true. Immigrants spend or pay more in tax than they withdraw in services, and that's all services. That's road use, that's schools, that's health, all of that. So actually, immigrants are subsidising the welfare state. They're reducing the amount of taxes that native Britons have to pay to get the same services, or they're reducing the amount of borrowing that you have to do. It's possible that more immigrants coming in, or different kinds of immigrants coming in, would be different. We have very tight immigration policies here, so it could be that the people we've got are good, and the kind of extra people we would get wouldn't be good. If that did turn out to be a problem, I think it would be a lot more sensible to build a wall around the welfare state and make it more difficult to access benefits. It's already quite difficult, more difficult to access the NHS and so on, but still easy to work here for, let's say, 2 years or 3 years, to make sure that we didn't have this effect. Because building a wall around access to services is a lot easier than building a wall around, it's a lot less costly, I would say, than building a wall around the country, which is what we currently do. But really, I would be surprised if we even needed to do that. We already have fairly strict controls. Most people are young, so it means that they are going to work for many, many years. They're going to presumably improve their incomes as they work throughout their lives. And as I say, the evidence is pretty clear that immigrants are like a blood transfusion, and they kind of invigorate the public finances rather than being the other way around.
But say, what about those immigrants coming from those countries? They come and they leave those countries, and there's a real negative effect on the economy where they come from, because say the most intelligent, even the poorest, they reduce the working population of that country. How can you kind of reconcile this? Because say the developed world develops fast, as you said, but what about the global south or poor countries?
So I think that probably the most important argument against immigration is this idea of brain drain, that the most talented people leave their home countries and leave those countries deprived of the real movers and shakers of the economy. And that seems possible, it seems plausible, but when we actually look at what happens, it seems more to be like a brain gain. Because if you have very talented people in very poor countries, so let's say you're a computer programmer in Ethiopia or in Somalia, something like that, the opportunities that you have for work are going to be much, much more limited, both because of the economies being much less developed and because of the infrastructure there being much less good at sort of allowing you to work and allowing you to do what you need to do, compared to somewhere like the UK. So if you can come from, say, Addis Ababa to London, and you can work in London, your income is going to increase by 10 or 20 times. This is a huge increase in income. And what happens is that those people send back huge amounts of money to their families in their home countries. This is called remittances. Remittances from the developed world, the rich countries of the world, to the developing world were 3 times the size of aid sent from Western governments to third world governments in the last year. This is enormous. There doesn't seem to be a huge impact of these remittances on economic growth, but there is a huge impact on poverty, because the money bypasses the government, it goes straight to people who actually need or can use the money effectively, and it seems to avoid many of the problems that we have, that we associate with sending aid to these countries. So I think actually, even though the brain drain point is important, it isn't true. And the brain gain argument actually in favour of migration seems to be true. And if we want to improve development or improve the lives of people in the developing world, migration and making it easier for people to come and work here might be the best tool we have to do it.